Hey, round two. I just made a video of how I want you to study history. I want you to study history politically, economically, culturally, socially, and you got to think about the geography of a particular place as well. So hopefully you've watched that one first. Now let's get into how these colonies were different. Because that's again how they were different. There's a reason why I wanted you to color your map different colors, not based on the colonies, because the colonies are they're pretty much going to be different regardless. But I want you to think about these colonies in those three different regions: the New England colonies, the Middle colonies, and the Southern colonies. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to perform a PECS analysis over the colonies based on the region. Got it? Yeah. You excited? History. Let's go. All right. Starting with the New England colonies, we've got Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire. Politically, this is where like the ideal of an American government started. Town hall meetings where communities were making decisions together. There was a strong emphasis on self-government. One of the things that I know I'm going to mention is one of the first examples of constitutional government in the colonies, and that's the Mayflower Compact. So when people are coming over on the Mayflower on that ship, they're like, okay, this is how our society is going to be run. Voting rights, however, were very much tied to church membership in some colonies, which left little religious freedom, which caused Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire to split from that Massachusetts Bay Colony. New Hampshire is technically used to be part of the Pennsylvania colony, but as you'll learn with Pennsylvania, New Hampshire also valued religious freedom. And you didn't really see a lot of that in the New England colonies, specifically coming from Massachusetts. Massachusetts tended to dominate. So if you didn't have membership to the Puritan Church in Massachusetts, you couldn't vote. That's what it meant. Either way, speaking of money, and this very much has to do with geography, as you'll see. Poor rocky soil limited large scale farming. So the farms in the New England colonies were very small. And that made a lot of people reliant on each other, which is why a lot of the political stuff, they were very close knit. And as I said, the economy was based on small farms. But one of the interesting things about the New England colonies, based on their geography, is they were located really close to some healthy fishing grounds up in Boston area. So people began to whale, which is going out and killing whales. So don't freak out because I'm talking about killing whales. There was a purpose for it. When you killed a whale, you didn't just eat the meat, you also boiled the stuff down to make oil, which allowed people to have light at night. Big shipbuilding area, and because of the Boston Harbor, they were a big trading area. Um, Economically, folks struggled early because they wanted to look for gold. As they found out really quick, there wasn't a lot of gold in the New England colonies, and they couldn't grow cash crops, which required warmth, longer growing seasons, that sort of thing. So that definitely had an impact on how people lived. Culturally, in the New England colonies, religion dominated life. A lot of those Puritan values, where you know, work hard and study the Bible. Speaking of studying the Bible, the only way for you to study the Bible is for you to read it, which is why a lot of early educational movements, like modern day schools, are influenced by a movement that happened in Massachusetts, where you go from class to class to class, emphasizing reading and writing, that sort of thing. Strict moral codes, church attendance. There were certain dress codes, and I have a comma there because I didn't really want to like type it out because I'm teaching eighth graders, but like early temperance movement. Temperance just means restrictions on alcohol manufacture and consumption. That's what I mean by morality there. Harvard was founded early. You ever heard of Harvard? They initially started as a minister's college to train church leaders. But it's not just important for that. This is where you see a lot of older schools, older colleges in the New England colonies. That's what I mean by early education. But the big thing culturally, you can pretty much wrap this up with a quote by John Winthrop, an early colonial leader in the New England colonies. His mentality was he wanted the New England colonies to be like a city on a hill where people look up and see how wonderful life could be. And they're going to make life wonderful by having very strict religious traditions. So that's what they meant by that. Socially, like I said, communities were very close knit. It was almost like that watchdog mentality where everybody is looking out for each other. Families were large, and a lot of what people did for fun, their social life, very much revolved around their religious beliefs and community responsibilities. So, the geography of the New England colonies, I've mentioned this before: rocky, harsh winters, short growing season. A lot of forests meant that they were able to build buildings and ships. That's what timber means. Access to the Atlantic Ocean meant that they could trade mostly through Boston Harbor. Boom. Moving into the middle colonies were more diverse politically um, in terms of like structure. They did have like small little town meetings, but they also had larger county governments because what you'll notice with the middle colonies is that they're larger, which means there were the people in those colonies were more spread out. So having a local government wasn't always beneficial to everybody, but having a county government, that's where we can mix that in. In terms of like the mix between politics and religion, the middle colonies are mostly religiously tolerant, and there weren't a lot of um, like voting rights ties to a church as you saw in the New England colonies. So more people had more rights. William Penn is the guy who, like, I know, yeah, I've got it mentioned, so I'll just go ahead and start into it. The middle colonies were very much dominated by William Penn. William Penn got a huge chunk of land from the English crown, and he wanted to conduct a holy experiment because William Penn was a Quaker and he was not specifically affiliated with the Church of England. So William Penn appealed to the king and said, "Hey, I'm a Quaker. If you give me a bunch of land, I'd like to have these Quakers come and settle here, and I'm going to make the crown a bunch of money." Um, also, so he saw Pennsylvania as a hub, a haven of religious diversity. So a lot of different mixes of religion there um, culturally. But again, there were no political restrictions based on your religious beliefs. The colony of New York used to be owned by the Dutch. So the Dutch constitutional history, the Dutch royalty, those were the rules that were in place in New York first. But then England took over in the 1660s, and that's where New York is now governed by English law and English custom. So that's interesting to mention there. Economically, the middle colonies are known as the breadbasket. And yeah, no offense to Delaware and New Jersey, but New York and Pennsylvania are the dominant ones here because they're larger. But these colonies were mostly known for having larger farms, not larger. meaning larger than like the New England farms. So it takes a lot of wheat and barley and oats and rye to create things like bread that made people, not hungry. New York was a major trade and shipping hub. Ironworks and small scale manufacturing, even early before we declared independence, the middle colonies were a little bit more industrial than the New England and southern colonies. The New England colonies, specifically around Boston, are going to industrialize and move away from farming, but it happens first in the middle. A lot of political and cultural diversity because of the mix of a different culture, and culturally we are able to be okay with cultural differences. It did lead to a lot more economic diversity because that's what you get diversity. You get new ideas and ways of living that improves your economy. Culturally, I'll say it again, very culturally diverse, and that's important because it does impact the politics, economics, and the social parts of this particular group of colonies. Culturally very diverse, religiously, a lot of different. It is a Quaker dominated area. The Dutch were around. A lot of German dissidents are moving from Germany to the eventual United States in the middle colonies. And in fact, Benjamin Franklin is actually going to be a little bit worried with German immigrants. So the issue of immigration is nothing new in United States history. But Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, these colonies are very, very diverse. And like I said, especially in Pennsylvania. The culture emphasized fairness and community, and you know that because the largest city, or arguably at the time, the largest city, New York, is the biggest city in the middle colonies now. So Philadelphia is literally known as the city of brotherly love. You get that city or get that title by looking at the name of the city. Phila, Phila, just means in Latin, love. Delphia, city, city of love. Come on, it's there in the name. Socially, it did emphasize a lot more equality compared to the other regions. Again, in New England, it's going to be very Puritan based. Um, and anything outside of that is going to maybe be a little bit shied upon. And in the South, it's very structured socially as well. So these middle colonies see a lot more equality compared to the other regions. Um, there were different social classes of like people that are really rich compared to people that are really poor. There were classes like that, but not as rigid compared to the New England or the Southern colonies. Large cities like New York and Philadelphia became cultural and economic hubs. That is still important today. The city of New York, largest city in the United States, a lot of different people that live there. Philadelphia, also very large still today. New Jersey, a lot of people there. Delaware, not as many people there, but it's still very close to these other larger states, colonies. Sorry, I keep forgetting to do that. We're not the states yet. But either way, moving forward. Sorry about that. Water fell. It's fine. The geography of the middle colonies very much influenced what they were allowed to do. Fertile soil and mild climates with longer growing seasons compared to that of New England. It's not as long as the southern colonies, but the fertile soil and the hot summers, cold winters, spring and fall, very much like our climate now. And these rivers, there's a reason why I had you map them. The Hudson River allowed for resources from the middle of New York to get out to New York City, and in the Delaware River went right through Pennsylvania up to Delaware. And even though Delaware was a small was a small colony. Guess where they were trading? Philadelphia, which is located right on the Delaware River. And both of these rivers flow towards the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, which makes it really important for shipping. Last type of colonies, these are the southern colonies: Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. There are 5 southern colonies. We'll remember that. Politically, Virginia is known for having the first example of a representative assembly where people from all over the state, and not just having local governments, but people from all over the state were coming in. So the House of Burgesses in Virginia very much looked like Parliament back in England. The politics, the rules governing Southern societies, were dominated by wealthy plantation owners. So, really rich folks that had really large farms. Those people are going to be making the rules. More on that in a second. So, again, because these southern colonies outside of Maryland are geographically huge, you saw more county based governments compared to town governments. And again, the reason why it was like that is just purely geography. But again, Maryland's the odd one, but there's a reason why Maryland is a southern colony. I'll get to that right now. Oh, here we go. This is where the southern colonies very much differ from the other 2 regions of colonies. They are known for plantations, baby, plantations. Move right down here if you don't know what a plantation is. A plantation is a large farm. Average farms in the middle colonies were in like the 100 acres range. Average plantations in the southern colonies were in the hundreds or sometimes thousands of acres. These are large farms. And they wanted large farms because they were able to grow tobacco, rice, indigo, later cotton. Cotton is going to become huge when it comes to the economic strength of the southern colonies, because all of those types of crops you can sell for a lot of cash. Tobacco, you would process it, you would smoke it. Don't smoke, kids. But a lot of money is made in it, so I got to bring it up. But don't be freaking smoking. Rice, that's an important thing to have because you can grow a lot of rice, and if as long as you can keep it dry, you can take a lot of rice and move it across the ocean and it won't get bad. That's good money. Indigo is used for fashion. Indigo allows you to get like a purple dye. I'll say that. Purple, blue, somewhere in there. And then later, cotton, literally the fabric that is in a lot of different types of clothing, even today. And this is how England built its major big deal shipping powerhouse in the southern, middle, and New England colonies, because a lot of money making products were coming from England, or going to England, I should say. So these crops are only able to be profitable if we have slave labor. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky in U.S. history. Why did they have slaves in the United States? Money, baby. People wanted to make money. And if you remember who the most influential political group were plantation owners. So you'll see a lot of states moving away from having slave labor because they didn't need it. But in the South, they needed it for these crops to be able to be turned into a profit. So that's going to have a huge impact on the future of the United States, because this is where these colonies are very different politically and culturally from the Middle and New England colonies, where slavery is not as important. Major dividing issue in American history. I will call slavery the Thanos of American history, early American history. It is the Thanos of early American history, because Thanos was that bad guy who was just floating around, wasn't really the important bad guy, but just floating around for a long time. And then all of a sudden, boom, it's a problem. And the United States will go to war because of slavery. And these states wanting the right to have slaves. So there you go. Culturally, the Anglican Church was the dominant church, but I also have to mention that Maryland was established to be a Catholic haven because Catholics were mistreated um, in a lot of different parts of the English colonies because the Church of England protested the Catholic Church, and England had a civil war because of religion. And the Church of England won out. So if you were Catholic and you were an English person, Maryland was a great spot for you to go to because you could actually practice your religious beliefs without being judged. Education was very much limited to wealthy families, and it wasn't as community based compared to that in the middle and New England colonies where they stressed literacy so they could read the Bible. Education was not a community thing, it was a money thing. They'd hire private tutors instead of church leaders to educate. And then plantation life. Because plantations were such an important part of the economics, of the politics, and the culture of Southern colonies, I'll just go ahead and start talking about plantation culture right now. Plantation culture led to sharp social divisions in the Southern colonies. So if you think about it like a pyramid, at the very tippy top of the pyramid, you've got wealthy planters. In the middle, you've got poor farmers, and your textbook assignment defined this as an indentured servant, somebody who is working like a slave, but with a limited amount of time. Like they have to work for, anywhere between 5 and 7 years, something like that. And then they could be free, but they're still not plantation owners. And then below that, the base of the pyramid were slaves. And that's where we see the long-term development of, why racism exists in this country and in other countries, because for a long time, in this part of the world, if there was an African American, if there was a black person, people would assume that they're a slave. They're somebody else's property. So they would mistreat them. They would call them names. And that has a huge impact on the development of American culture, the politics, the rules that are allowed in this country, and definitely the economics. Even now, African Americans face a setback in terms of educational access and job access. So that's a reality even today. But a lot of it was based on two ways of grouping people: race and money. And things that people did for fun was very much focused around the plantation. People would have parties. And when the plantation owners were having parties, the slaves had their own versions of parties. And this is where we see the development of a lot of African American culture, which kind of looks like English normal American culture, but it's a little bit different because they were not allowed to participate in Southern society. So the society was also based on geography. Um, the Southern colonies didn't have a lot of large cities like New York or Boston or Pennsylvania. They had large cities, but they were not as large as the New England or middle colonies. So that led to far fewer schools, fewer churches because people were spread out and there weren't as many people there. And then finally, the geography of the southern colonies. Warm climate, long growing season, fertile soil leads to cash crops. And then broad rivers like the St. James River allowed shipping from the plantations to the Atlantic, the Savannah River. Um, Charleston's got a lot of rivers around it, a lot of swamps. But it was a little bit harder to navigate if you were away from a river system. So that's the geography of the South. Now, life was good under the British. And then there's an article that you have to read about the French and Indian War. So this is why the French and Indian War is important. The first reason is that the British do win, but it's really expensive. Um, we got control of Canada and all of the lands east of the Mississippi. So that's that like frontier land on your map. Um, but Britain was in a lot of debt because war is expensive. So in order to pay for that debt, Britain begins to tighten control on the colonies, and this is where that new textbook assignment that came out yesterday, Friday, what it's all about. Um, so the British were like, okay, we're going to tax your stuff that you're making, and they're like, we can already only sell to you. Now you're taxing that. That's it's not fair. Um, mercantilism. So a lot of colonists who were already used to creating their own tax system, their own rules, saw that action when they're constantly taxing us or telling us how to govern, we were already okay without them, and they were thousands of miles away, and they're trying to tell us what to do. It's not going to make us happy. The Proclamation of 1763, which essentially is one big long line um, up the Appalachian Mountains. The British Parliament and monarchy were like, yeah, you guys can't go beyond that because we can't afford to protect you if you go beyond that. So you're not allowed to go beyond that. So that really upset the British colonists throughout the various regions. And because the British offered all of these colonies a common struggle, this did lead to a growing united sense of like, hey, the British are really problematic. And, all of us here in the colonies, us in New York, us in Massachusetts, us in Pennsylvania, us in Georgia and South Carolina, we might be culturally English, but all of us here have a common or united struggle. And this is why the French and Indian War really kicks off these different colonies with different needs, different desires to come together. But not all the colonies reacted the same way right away. And the reason is just within the different types of colonies themselves. And I will stress this until I die as a teacher. Not all of the colonies reacted the same way towards the British. So, as much as I say that they were united, it didn't happen right away. And it's a lot like politics now. We're like, oh, this is a problem. Well, not everybody's going to see it right away. They may never see it as a problem in the first place. That's politics, man. And we might call ourselves the United States of America, but these colonies weren't always united. They were different. So here's how they perceived these different tendencies towards the British. The New England colonies, they hated it. Their economy was based on trade, shipping, and fishing. So, like British actions like the Sugar Act, Navigation Act, the Tea Act, restricted their trade and taxed the stuff coming in. Come on, stop bothering us. Boston was a major port city. So, under the Intolerable Acts, when Boston was shut down, a lot of New Englanders couldn't make money. That made them mad. And their tradition of self government, the small town meetings that they had, clashed with the British attempts to come in and say, hey, here's a rule, you have to follow it. And they're like, we've been making rules as a tiny community for a long time. So, New England is going to be the hotbed. This is where a lot of resistance is going to start. The New England colonies is where the resistance is going to start. And you'll read about them. The Boston Massacre, the Boston Tea Party, the early battles at Lexington and Concord. Bunker Hill. All of these major things in the build up to the Declaration of Independence are going to happen in the New England colonies. Now, the middle colonies, they were a little bit more moderate. They're more separated from the New England colonies. They had a more diverse economy. So when the British started restricting trade, they weren't really impacted by that economically as hard as the New England colonies. And because the middle colonies, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, they were very diverse, there were a lot of different people that were there. They didn't really care about what the English were doing. Dutch traders who lived there, no big deal. No big deal. What do I care about England? That's fine. I'll just trade with the Dutch. Germans, same thing. Quakers are just happy to be there because they're practicing their religious beliefs. So when the British are starting to do things that are making the New England colonies upset, ah, it's not going to impact them. They're not going to care about it as much. Um, with that being said, as time moves on, these people from the middle colonies are going to begin to uh, see what the New England colonies are doing, see how the British are actually impacting them, because they're going to hear about and read about things like the Boston Massacre. So those large cities, Philadelphia and New York, are going to be meeting spots when all of the different colonies have to come together, which spread those revolutionary ideas. Or let's throw off the British rule. Let's start our own government that treats everybody fairly. That sort of thing. Those revolutionary ideas spread in large cities like a wildfire. So, big wrap up here. The middle colonies were initially slow to push for independence, but by 1776, they saw the British taxation and other restrictions as a threat to both economic opportunity, political rights, and just honestly, cultural fairness. You know, enough people read about the Boston Massacre by that point. They wanted to stand up for their rights. Southern colonies. What do people care more about in politics? Like soft issues like making sure people are fair or their wallet? In America, it's their wallet every single time. Those cash crops, tobacco, rice, indigo, cotton, they wanted to trade with England no matter what. So that was their main trading partner. Remember, in mercantilism, the the colony can only trade with the mother country. They're fine. They were a little bit upset about the proclamation of 1763 because historically, if you're studying the colony of Virginia, the Virginia colony extended all the way to modern day Tennessee. That's a lot of land. So the proclamation of 1763 made those wealthy plantation owners a little bit upset because they're like, we can't, if we're not allowed to move west, we can't grow more cotton. That's going to impact my money. But those new British taxes and restrictions, again, if it was happening to people in the New England and middle colonies, it could potentially impact them. And in particular, one of the things that was growing in England was this call to end slavery. Well, those southern plantation owners can't have that. And it's also historically one of the reasons why the United States is going to be one of the last modern countries to get rid of slavery. So when it came to getting rid of British rule, one of the things that I have to bring up is some of these southern colonies maybe were okay with declaring independence because if Britain outlaws slavery and we still are controlled by England, we're going to have a loss of money. So at the end of the day, I can't mention Virginia and those southern colonies without mentioning Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, because by the middle of the 1770s, those two folks, George Washington was a very popular figure at the time. He was very prominent during the French and Indian War, as you have read about. Um, but Thomas Jefferson is going to be a really smart dude, really smart plantation owner who is going to finally come to understand after a long discussion, long conversations with people like John Adams and Ben Franklin, that he's going to write a document, and that document is going to display why the Americans wanted to free themselves from British rule. It's going to explain why. And at the end of the document, he's going to say these words for the first time. We declare that these 13 British colonies are independent from England, and we're going to call ourselves the United States of America. So, the reason why I have you learn politically, economically, culturally, and socially, and geographically, if I'm honest, about these colonies is that each region had different traditions of self-government, town meetings in New England, assemblies in the South, a mix of both in the middle colonies. These shaped how strongly they resisted British control because they're going to resist them at different levels. Town hall meetings, county assemblies, everything. And then we're going to start creating these state governments as well. New England's trade, the middle colonies' farming and commerce, and the South's plantations meant that British taxes and restrictions affected these colonies differently. The New England colonies are going to face the biggest brunt because when you look at those events that build up to the Declaration of Independence, they're going to be most impacted. Middle and southern colonies, it took a little bit more time. Culturally and socially, religious traditions, class structures, and diversity influenced how people thought about freedom and rights. The English gave the New England colonies a place to practice their religious beliefs. But then when they started telling them what they could and couldn't do economically, they were afraid that maybe those religious rights would also be taken away. And because the middle colonies were very diverse, with a bunch of Dutch and German folks already living there, the Swedish, they influenced how they thought about these negative actions by the British. And then in the South, they just wanted to make money. That's why they existed. And only throughout just time, like from 1763 to 1766, that's 13 years. A lot can happen in 13 years. And that's how long it took since the French and Indian War for these colonies to finally unite. But ultimately, these colonies are not the same. And it took a long time for them to have a shared frustration. But when you study these things politically, economically, culturally, socially, and geographically, you're going to realize that these colonies are different. And even within the regions of colonies, they're different. But that's also what makes our country great, is our diversity. We are different. And that those differences are based on all of those factors. But when our country becomes united, and we will, our country is capable of doing a lot of different things. So there's my second video, the political, economic, cultural, and social study of the 13 original colonies. Bye.